The day Malik Johnson stepped off the bus in the small Midwest town, he knew things were going to be different. His dad had gotten a new job that required the family to move from their bustling city neighborhood to this quiet, tree-lined community where everyone seemed to know each other's business. For 16 years, Malik had grown up surrounded by people who looked like him, talked like him, and understood his struggles. But here, in this unfamiliar place, he felt like an outsider before he even set foot in his new high school. On his first morning at Willow Creek High, Malik stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his backpack straps nervously. He wore his favorite hoodie, a deep navy blue with a small emblem of his old karate dojo stitched onto the sleeve. It was one of the few things that made him feel connected to his past. As he walked downstairs, his mom handed him a packed lunch bag and gave him an encouraging smile. "You'll do great, sweetheart," she said warmly. Malik nodded, though inside, he wasn't so sure. When he arrived at school, the halls buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the sound of lockers slamming. Shut! Students moved in tight-knit groups, chatting about weekend plans or gossiping about teachers. Malik stuck close to the walls, keeping his head down as he navigated toward the main office to pick up his schedule. Every step felt heavier than the last. People glanced at him curiously, some whispering behind cupped hands. He could almost hear what they were thinking. Who is this kid? Why does he look so different? His first class was history, and when he entered the room, all eyes turned to him. The teacher introduced him briefly, pronouncing his name awkwardly. Malik, before pointing to an empty seat near the back. As Malik slid into the chair, he noticed a boy sitting diagonally across from him smirking. The boy nudged his friend and whispered something, then both burst out laughing. Malik pretended not to notice, focusing instead on opening his notebook and jotting down notes. By lunchtime, Malik was exhausted. All morning, he'd felt like he was under a microscope, every movement scrutinized. When the bell rang for lunch, he grabbed his brown paper bag and headed to the cafeteria. Scanning the crowded space, he spotted an empty table in the corner and quickly claimed it. Unpacking his sandwich, he tried to focus on eating, but the noise around him was overwhelming. Conversations swirled everywhere, blending into a cacophony of voices. Just as he thought he might actually get through the meal unnoticed, 4 figures approached his table. It was Brandon, the same boy who'd laughed at him earlier, and 3 of his friends. They were seniors, tall and broad-shouldered, exuding confidence that bordered on arrogance. Brandon dropped his tray onto the table with a loud clatter, causing Malik to flinch slightly. "Hey, new guy," Brandon said, leaning forward with a smirk. "What's your deal?" Malik swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table beneath his palms. "I'm just trying to eat my lunch," he replied evenly, avoiding eye contact. Brandon chuckled, glancing at his buddies. "Oh, come on, don't be shy, we're just curious. You talk funny. Where you from?" Malik hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Chicago," he answered finally, keeping his tone neutral. "Chicago?" Brandon repeated mockingly. "That explains it. Big city attitude, huh? Bet you think you're better than us." "I didn't say that," Malik shot back, his voice firmer now. He hated being stereotyped, especially based on where he came from, but Brandon wasn't interested in listening. He leaned closer, his face inches from Malik's. "Listen, buddy, we run things around here, so maybe you should watch yourself." With that, he flicked a crumpled napkin at Malik's face and laughed, his friends joining in. Malik clenched, his fists under the table, fighting the urge to lash out. Instead, he took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. These guys weren't worth losing control over, not yet anyway. As the days went by, the bullying became a regular part of Malik's routine. Each morning, he braced himself for the taunts and jeers that awaited him. Sometimes it was subtle, like when someone accidentally bumped into him in the hallway, but other times it was blatant. During gym class, Brandon would intentionally throw balls too hard during dodgeball games, aiming directly at Malik's head. In science lab, one of Brandon's friends spilled chemicals near Malik's station, pretending it was an accident while snickering loudly. Despite the constant harassment, Malik refused to let them see him crack. Back home, he practiced martial arts in the garage late at night, channeling his frustration into disciplined movements. His sensei had always taught him that true strength came from restraint, that fighting wasn't about proving dominance, but protecting oneself and others. Still, Malik couldn't help wondering how long he could hold out before snapping. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, Malik found himself replaying the day's events in his mind. He thought about the way Brandon's insults stung, not because they were clever or original, but because they reminded him of how isolated he felt in this town. Yet, amidst the anger and loneliness, a spark of defiance began to grow within him. If Brandon and his crew wanted to test him, fine, let them try, because Malik was done backing down. The days turned into weeks, and Malik's life at Willow Creek High became a repetitive cycle of tension and resilience. Every morning he woke up dreading the moment he stepped onto the school bus, knowing full well what awaited him once he arrived. The whispers in the hallways, the snickers during class, and the constant feeling of being watched. It all weighed heavily on him. But if there was one thing Malik had learned growing up in Chicago, it was how to adapt. He carried himself with quiet dignity, refusing to let the bullies see just how much their actions affected him. Brandon and his crew seemed to take pleasure in making Malik's life miserable. They were relentless, finding new ways to torment him almost daily. One day they'd trip him in the cafeteria line, causing his tray to clatter noisily against the floor while they laughed uproariously. Another day, they'd block his path in the hallway, forcing him to squeeze past them as they mocked his clothes or called him names. It wasn't just Brandon either. His friends egged him on, eager to join in the fun. To them, it was all a game, a way to assert their dominance over someone who didn't fit in. What frustrated Malik most was how casual it all felt to them. They acted like their behavior was normal, as if teasing and harassing someone for no reason was simply part of high school life. For Malik, though, it was anything but normal. Back in Chicago, he'd faced challenges too, but never like this. There, he'd been surrounded by people who understood where he came from, who shared similar experiences. Here, he was alone, an outsider in every sense of the word. And yet, despite the isolation, Malik held on to a stubborn streak of pride. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. One particularly rough afternoon, Malik found himself cornered near the lockers after gym class. Brandon and two of his buddies approached him, their smirks widening as they realized they had him trapped. "Hey, city boy," Brandon sneered, stepping closer. "You think you're tough, huh? Walking around like you own the place." Malik clenched his jaw, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, urging him to fight back. But he forced himself to stay still, meeting Brandon's gaze with steely calmness. "I'm not trying to start anything," he said evenly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Oh, really?" Brandon replied, feigning surprise. "Then why are you always so quiet? You scared or something?" Malik didn't answer. Instead, he focused on controlling his breathing, reminding himself of everything his sensei had taught him about discipline and patience. This wasn't the time to act rashly. If he gave in to his anger now, he'd only make things worse. So he stood there, silent and unmoving, waiting for the storm to pass. For a moment, Brandon looked taken aback. He'd expected Malik to lash out, to yell or cry or show some sign of weakness. But instead, Malik just stared at him, his expression unreadable. Frustrated, Brandon shoved him lightly against the locker. "Come on, say something," he demanded. Still, Malik remained silent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Brandon backed off, muttering under his breath, "Whatever, weirdo, we'll get you later." With that, he turned and walked away, his friends trailing behind him. As soon as they were gone, Malik exhaled deeply, leaning against the locker for support. His legs felt shaky, and his hands trembled slightly, but he managed to compose himself before anyone else saw him. Slowly, he gathered his books and headed to his next class, replaying the encounter in his mind. Why did they hate him so much? What had he done to deserve this kind of treatment? Despite the mounting pressure, Malik refused to let the bullies define him. After school each day, he retreated to the garage where he practiced martial arts for hours. The rhythmic movements of punches, kicks, and blocks helped clear his mind, allowing him to channel his frustration into something productive. His sensei's 8 words echoed in his head. Fighting isn't about aggression, it's about protecting yourself and others. Those lessons kept him grounded, reminding him that true strength came from restraint, not retaliation. But even as he trained, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that things were escalating. Brandon and his crew weren't just content with verbal insults anymore. They were starting to push boundaries physically. One day during gym class, Brandon deliberately elbowed Malik in the ribs while playing basketball, sending him sprawling to the floor. Another time, one of Brandon's friends tripped Malik in the hallway, causing him to scrape his knee against the tiled floor. Each incident chipped away at Malik's patience, testing his resolve. He knew he couldn't keep ignoring them forever. At some point, he'd have to stand up for himself, not because he wanted revenge, but because he deserved respect. Yet, the question lingered in his mind. How far was he willing to go? At home, Malik often replayed scenarios in his head, imagining different ways he could confront Brandon. Sometimes he pictured himself walking away calmly, proving that he was above their petty games. Other times, he envisioned standing his ground, using his martial arts skills to put Brandon in his place. Both options had their appeal, but neither felt entirely satisfying. One evening, as he sat on the couch flipping through TV channels, Malik's younger sister Amina joined him. She was only 10 years old, but she had a knack for reading people, especially her big brother. "You seem mad," she observed, tucking her legs beneath her. "I'm fine," Malik replied automatically, though his tone betrayed him. Amina tilted her head, studying him closely. "Is it those mean kids again?" Malik hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, they won't leave me alone." "Why don't you tell someone?" Amina asked innocently. "Like mom or dad, or even a teacher?" "It's not that simple," Malik explained. "If I tell, they might stop for a little while, but then they'll just find another way to bother me. Besides, I can handle it." Amina frowned, unconvinced. "But you shouldn't have to handle it alone. That's not fair." Her words struck a chord deep within Malik. Fairness, or rather the lack of it, was exactly what bothered him most about the situation. Why should he have to endure this kind of treatment? Why should anyone? Still, he didn't want to burden his family with his problems. They already had enough to worry about with the move and adjusting to their new lives. That night, as Malik lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he made a decision. He wouldn't wait around for things to change on their own. If Brandon and his crew wanted to test him, fine. Let them try. Because Malik was done playing the victim. From now on, he would prepare himself, not just physically, but mentally, for whatever came next. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon during gym class. The air in the school was thick with anticipation for the weekend, and students were restless, eager to escape the confines of the building. For Malik, however, the day promised nothing but another round of torment from Brandon and his crew. Gym had always been one of the worst periods of his day, a chaotic mix of noise, physical contact, and opportunities for the bullies to assert their dominance. Today's activity was basketball, and Malik found himself reluctantly paired with Brandon's group. He tried to stay out of the way, focusing on passing the ball and avoiding any unnecessary attention. But Brandon wasn't about to let him off so easily. From the moment the game began, Brandon made it clear that Malik was the target. Every time Malik touched the ball, Brandon would shout insults or mock his every move. "You call that dribbling?" he sneered, drawing laughter from his friends. "Even my grandma could play better than you." Malik gritted his teeth, forcing himself to ignore the taunts. He concentrated on keeping his footing steady and his passes accurate, determined not to give Brandon the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. But Brandon wasn't done. As the game progressed, he grew bolder, deliberately bumping into Malik whenever they crossed paths. Each collision sent a jolt through Malik's body, but he refused to react. Then, with only minutes left in the period, Brandon pushed things too far. Malik had just caught a pass near the basket when Brandon barreled into him, shoving him hard enough to knock him off balance. Malik stumbled backward, his arms flailing as he tried to regain his footing. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The sound of sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, the collective gasp of the other students, the look of triumph flashing across Brandon's face. When Malik finally steadied himself, anger surged through him like a tidal wave. His chest tightened, and his fists clenched involuntarily. But instead of lashing out immediately, he locked eyes with Brandon, his expression unreadable. There was no fear in Malik's gaze, only a quiet intensity that made Brandon hesitate for a fraction of a second. "What's wrong, city boy?" Brandon jeered, trying to mask his uncertainty. "Can't take a little bump?" That was it. The final straw. Something inside Malik snapped, not violently but decisively. Without saying a word, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. Before anyone could react, Malik grabbed Brandon's wrist, twisting it behind, his back with practiced precision. In one fluid motion, he spun Brandon around and pinned him to the ground, pressing his knee firmly against the bully's shoulder blades. The gym erupted into chaos. Students screamed, shouted, and scrambled to get a better view of what was happening. Some cheered loudly, while others looked on in stunned silence. Even the teacher, who had been distracted by a conversation with another student, rushed over, yelling for everyone to settle down. For Malik, the world narrowed to the space between him and Brandon. He leaned down slightly, his voice low but firm. "Don't ever touch me again," he said, enunciating each word carefully. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, Malik released Brandon and stood up, brushing invisible dust off his hands. He took a step back, watching as Brandon scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You're dead." Brandon spat, pointing a finger at Malik. His voice trembled with fury, but there was also a flicker of fear in his eyes. It was the first time anyone had seen him lose control, and lose badly. Malik didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Brandon standing there, fuming. As he headed toward the locker room, he felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him: relief, pride, and even a twinge of guilt. He hadn't wanted it to come to this, but he couldn't deny the sense of vindication that washed over him. For once, Brandon had been forced to confront someone who wouldn't back down. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. By the end of the school day, nearly everyone knew what had happened in the gym. Reactions varied wildly. Some students admired Malik's composure and skill, whispering stories about how he'd effortlessly taken down the school's biggest bully. Others sided with Brandon, accusing Malik of starting the fight and claiming he'd gotten lucky. Teachers, meanwhile, were divided. A few praised Malik for defending himself, while others scolded both boys for resorting to violence. Despite the mixed reactions, Malik couldn't help but notice a subtle shift in the way people treated him. In the halls, some students gave him wide berths, clearly intimidated by what they'd seen. Others nodded respectfully or offered hesitant smiles as if acknowledging his strength. Even the teachers seemed to regard him differently, their tones more cautious when addressing him. But Malik knew this wasn't over. If anything, the showdown in the gym had only deepened the rift between him and Brandon. The bully was humiliated, and humiliation bred resentment. Malik could practically feel Brandon's glare burning into his back during classes, a silent promise that this feud was far from resolved. Over the weekend, Malik spent hours preparing for whatever might come next. He trained harder than ever, drilling combinations and practicing defensive maneuvers in the garage. At the same time, he thought long and hard about how to handle the situation. Fighting back had given him a temporary sense of empowerment, but it hadn't solved the underlying problem. Brandon was still a bully, and the school was still a hostile environment. What Malik needed was a plan, one that would protect him without escalating the conflict further. On Sunday evening, an unexpected ally emerged. Sarah, a shy girl from his English class, approached Malik after school. She'd been sitting quietly in the bleachers during the gym incident, her phone recording the entire scene. Now she hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to say thank you, she said, glancing nervously at her shoes. For standing up to Brandon. No one else has ever done that. Malik blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected gratitude from anyone, let alone Sarah, who usually kept to herself. It's okay, he replied cautiously. I didn't really have a choice. Yes, you did, Sarah insisted, looking up at him. You could have let him keep pushing you around, but you didn't. And now everyone knows he's not untouchable. Her words struck a chord within Malik. For the first time, he realized that his actions might have inspired others, not just to stand up for themselves, but to question why bullying was allowed to thrive in the first place. Maybe this wasn't just about him and Brandon anymore. Maybe it was about something bigger. Sarah went on to suggest a strategy. We should show the school what really happened, she said. Your side of the story. People need to see the truth. Malik considered her proposal carefully. Part of him wanted to avoid drawing more attention to himself, but another part recognized the potential power of exposing Brandon's behavior. Together, they decided to share the video Sarah had recorded, editing it to highlight key moments without revealing private details. They also drafted a letter explaining Malik's perspective, emphasizing the importance of treating others with respect. By Monday morning, Malik felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for a chance to change the toxic culture of Willow Creek High. Whether the school would listen remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. Malik was ready to face whatever came next. Monday morning arrived with an air of anticipation that hung over Willow Creek High like a storm cloud. The entire school seemed to buzz with energy, fueled by rumors of a potential showdown between Malik and Brandon. Students whispered in hushed tones during homeroom, exchanging theories about what might happen after school. Some speculated it would be another physical confrontation. Others thought it might escalate into something worse. Either way, everyone agreed on one thing. Today was going to be unforgettable. For Malik, the day felt endless. Each class dragged on as he tried to focus on lectures and assignments, but his mind kept drifting back to the events of Friday and what awaited him later. He knew the stakes were high. If he handled this situation poorly, it could define how people saw him for the rest of his time at Willow Creek. But if he played his cards right, maybe, just maybe, he could turn things around. During lunch, Sarah found Malik sitting alone in the library, poring over notes for his English essay. She slid into the seat across from him, her face pale with anxiety. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. Malik looked up, meeting her gaze. Not really, he admitted with a small shrug. But I don't have much of a choice, do I? If I ignore it, Brandon will just keep coming after me. Sarah nodded slowly, biting her lip. I know. It's just, what if it gets out of hand? What if they try to gang up on you? I've thought about that, Malik replied, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. That's why we need to stick to the plan. You record everything, okay? No matter what happens. Okay, Sarah said, though she still looked uneasy. After a pause, she added, You're braver than I am. I don't think I could handle all this attention. Malik chuckled softly, shaking his head. It's not bravery. Trust me, I'd rather be anywhere else right now. But sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it scares you. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and both students returned to their respective classes. As the final period ticked away, Malik's nerves grew tighter with each passing minute. When the dismissal bell finally rang, he took a deep breath, grabbed his bag, and headed toward the football field, where the crowd was already gathering. Dozens of students had congregated behind the bleachers, forming a loose circle around the designated fight zone. Laughter and chatter filled the air, punctuated by occasional shouts or cheers. At the center of it all stood Brandon, flanked by his usual crew. His posture was cocky, his arms crossed over his chest as he scanned the crowd with a smirk. When he spotted Malik approaching, his expression darkened. "There he is," Brandon called out, pointing dramatically at Malik. "City boy thinks. He's tough, huh? Let's see if he can back it up." The crowd erupted into cheers and jeers, some chanting Brandon's name while others egged Malik on. For a moment, Malik hesitated, taking in the scene before him. The weight of so many eyes on him was overwhelming, but he reminded himself why he was here. Not just for revenge, but for respect. Slowly, he stepped forward, stopping just a few feet away from Brandon. "You wanted this," Malik said evenly, his voice cutting through the noise. "So here I am," Brandon sneered, stepping closer until they were nearly nose to nose. "Yeah, here you are. Ready to get your butt kicked?" Malik didn't respond. Instead, he locked eyes with Brandon, his stance relaxed but alert. "What around, them?" The crowd fell silent, sensing that the moment of truth had arrived. For several tense seconds, neither boy moved. Then, without warning, Brandon lunged forward, throwing a wild punch aimed at Malik's face. But Malik was ready. Years of martial arts training kicked in as he sidestepped effortlessly, dodging the blow with ease. Before Brandon could recover, Malik countered with a swift kick to the side of his knee, causing him to stumble. The crowd gasped collectively. As Brandon hit the ground hard, his friends rushing to help him up. "Stay down," one of Brandon's buddies shouted, stepping forward aggressively. But Malik raised his hands defensively, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about you," he said, addressing the group. "If any of you want a piece of me, come ahead, but I'm done letting bullies push me around." To everyone's surprise, none of them made a move. They exchanged uncertain glances, clearly intimidated by Malik's confidence and skill. Meanwhile, Brandon struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You think you're so smart, huh?" he spat, glaring at Malik. "You're nothing but a freak." Malik shook his head, his tone measured. "No, Brandon. The only freak here is someone who needs to hurt others to feel strong. And guess what? That doesn't scare me anymore." Before Brandon could retort, Sarah stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Everyone needs to hear this," she announced loudly, playing the video she'd recorded of Friday's incident. The footage showed Brandon shoving Malik repeatedly before Malik finally defended himself. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the truth unfolded. The bullying, the provocation, the unfairness of it all. When the video ended, Sarah spoke again, her voice trembling but determined. Malik didn't start this. He didn't ask for trouble. All he wanted was to be left alone. But Brandon couldn't handle someone standing up to him. "So tell me, who's really the problem here?" A murmur spread through the crowd, opinions shifting visibly. Some students began nodding in agreement, while others looked away guiltily. Even Brandon's closest friends seemed unsure of what to say. For the first time, Malik saw cracks forming in the wall of intimidation that Brandon had built around himself. Seizing the moment, Malik addressed the crowd directly. "I didn't want this fight," he said, his voice carrying authority. "I didn't want to prove anything to anyone. But when someone keeps pushing you, you have two choices. Let them win, or show them you won't back down. I chose the second option, not because I hate Brandon, but because I refuse to live in fear." His words resonated deeply, earning scattered applause from the audience. As the clapping grew louder, Brandon slunk backward, his bravado crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his friends trailing behind him like shadows. When the dust settled, Malik exhaled deeply, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Sarah approached him, her eyes shining with admiration. "You did it," she said simply. "You stood up for yourself and for everyone else who's been afraid to speak out." Malik smiled faintly, though his heart still raced. "Yeah," he replied. "But this isn't over yet." "Not really. This school has a lot of problems, and exposing Brandon is just the beginning. We need to change the way people treat each other." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Then let's start now. Together." As they walked away from the field, Malik felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since moving to Willow Creek. Standing up to Brandon hadn't solved everything, but it had opened the door to something bigger. And for Malik, that was enough to keep fighting. The aftermath of the showdown rippled through Willow Creek High like a wave, reshaping the dynamics of the school in ways no one had anticipated. By Tuesday morning, Malik's name was on everyone's lips, not as the new kid or the quiet guy, but as someone who had stood up to injustice and refused to back down. The video Sarah had shared became the talk of the hallways, sparking heated debates among students and teachers alike. Some praised Malik for his courage, while others questioned whether exposing Brandon publicly was the right move. But regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable. The bullying culture that had festered unchecked for years was finally being called out. For Malik, life at school took on a strange duality. On one hand, he felt a newfound sense of respect from many of his peers. Students who had previously ignored him, or worse, joined in mocking him, now greeted him with nods or even smiles. In-class group projects suddenly included Malik without hesitation. And during lunch, he occasionally found himself sitting at tables with classmates eager to hear his story. It was surreal, almost like stepping into an alternate reality where he wasn't an outsider anymore. On the other hand, not everyone was ready to embrace this change. A small but vocal group of students continued to side with Brandon, accusing Malik of overreacting or seeking attention. Whispers followed him wherever he went, some supportive, others critical. And then there were those who simply avoided him altogether, unsure how to navigate the shifting social landscape. Despite the progress, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the tension hadn't fully dissipated. It had merely gone underground, waiting for its next opportunity to resurface. Brandon, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen for most of the week. His absence was glaringly obvious, especially in gym class and the cafeteria, where his loud voice and domineering presence had once dominated. When he finally returned to school on Thursday, he looked different, quieter, more subdued. His usual smirk was replaced by a scowl, and his friends seemed reluctant to engage with him openly. Rumors swirled about what had happened behind the scenes. Some said Brandon's parents had been called in for a meeting with the principal. Others claimed he'd received attention for weeks. Whatever the truth, it was clear that Brandon's authority within the school hierarchy had been shaken. One afternoon, as Malik was leaving chemistry lab, Brandon approached him near the lockers. At first, Malik tensed, bracing himself for another confrontation. But instead of sneering or throwing insults, Brandon hesitated, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a low voice barely audible over the hum of the hallway, Brandon muttered, "Look, I'm sorry." Malik blinked, caught off guard. Of all the scenarios he'd imagined playing out between them, this wasn't one of them. "What did you say?" he asked cautiously, narrowing his eyes. "I said, I'm sorry, okay?" Brandon repeated, his tone gruff but sincere. "I didn't realize how messed up everything got because of me." "You didn't deserve any of that crap." Malik studied Brandon carefully, searching for signs of insincerity, but all he saw was vulnerability, a stark contrast to the arrogance that had defined Brandon just days earlier. After a long pause, Malik nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," he said evenly. "But words aren't enough. If you really mean it, prove it." Brandon frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the challenge. "How am I supposed to do that?" "Start by treating people better," Malik replied firmly. "Not just me, but everyone. Stop acting like you're better than everyone else, and maybe apologize to the others you've hurt too." To Malik's surprise, Brandon didn't argue or storm off. Instead, he nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, okay, I'll try." It was a small victory, but an important one. As Brandon walked away, Malik felt a flicker of hope. Not for Brandon himself, but for the possibility of genuine change. Maybe redemption wasn't out of reach for anyone, not even someone like Brandon. In the days that followed, Malik threw himself into making sure the momentum didn't fade. With Sarah's help, he began organizing meetings with other students to discuss ways to address bullying at Willow Creek. They started small, gathering a handful of classmates in the library after school to brainstorm ideas. Gradually, the group grew larger, drawing in students from different grades and backgrounds. Malik encouraged everyone to share their experiences, creating a safe space where no one felt judged or dismissed. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. Teachers began taking notice of the initiative, offering guidance and resources to support the cause. One particularly influential teacher, Mr. Carter, suggested starting a diversity club aimed at fostering inclusivity and understanding across the student body. Malik jumped at the idea, volunteering to co-lead the club alongside Sarah. Together they planned workshops, guest speaker events, and awareness campaigns designed to educate students about empathy, acceptance, and standing up against injustice. The weeks turned into months. The impact of these efforts became increasingly visible. Conversations about bullying and bias became less taboo, giving rise to honest discussions both inside and outside the classroom. Posters promoting kindness and respect appeared on bulletin boards throughout the school, accompanied by quotes submitted by students themselves. Even the administration got involved, implementing stricter anti-bullying policies and holding mandatory seminars for staff and students. Through it all, Malik remained a central figure in the movement, not because he sought recognition, but because he believed in the power of collective action. He often reflected on how far he'd come since his first day at Willow Creek, when he'd felt so isolated and powerless. Back then, he never imagined he'd find allies in people like Sarah, or inspire others to speak out against injustice. Yet here he was, surrounded by a growing community of individuals determined to create a better environment for everyone. One evening, as Malik sat at home working on a speech for an upcoming assembly, his younger sister, Amina, plopped down beside him on the couch. "So are you famous now?" she teased, poking him playfully. Malik laughed, shaking his head. "Not exactly, but I guess I'm not invisible anymore." "You should be proud of yourself," Amina said seriously. "You changed things here. People listen to you now." Her words lingered in Malik's mind long after she left the room. He knew she was right. Things had changed. But more importantly, Malik realized that true strength wasn't about winning fights or proving dominance. It was about using your voice to uplift others even when it scared you. It was about turning pain into purpose and fear into courage. And for Malik, that lesson was worth more than any amount of applause or admiration. By the end of the school year, Willow Creek High looked and felt like a different place. While challenges still existed, the seeds of change had been planted, and Malik knew they would continue to grow, nurtured by the countless students who now understood the importance of standing together. For the first time since moving to the Midwest, Malik felt like he truly belonged. As the school year drew to a close, Malik found himself reflecting on everything that had happened since his first day at Willow Creek High. It was hard to believe how much had changed, not just for him, but for the entire school. The bullying culture that had once thrived unchecked was now being actively challenged, thanks in large part to the efforts of Malik, Sarah, and their growing group of allies. Conversations about kindness, respect, and inclusivity were no longer rare or taboo. They were becoming normal, even expected. Malik's role as a leader within the Diversity Club had earned him widespread recognition, though he never sought it for personal gain. He saw himself not as a hero, but as someone who had been given an opportunity to make a difference, and he wasn't about to waste it. His speeches at assemblies became highlights of the semester, inspiring students and teachers alike with messages of unity and resilience. "We all have the power to shape our environment," he often said, "but we can't do it alone. Change starts when we stand together." The transformation wasn't limited to words. Actions followed too. Students began forming smaller groups, focused on specific issues from mental health awareness to LGBTQ+ support. Even Brandon, who had initially resisted the idea of joining any such initiatives, surprised everyone by volunteering to lead workshops on conflict resolution. Though some remained skeptical of his motives, Malik noticed genuine effort in his behavior, a stark contrast to the bully he'd once been. One afternoon, as Malik and Sarah sat in the library planning the final event of the year, a community fair celebrating diversity, Brandon approached them, hesitantly. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his neck nervously. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to, but can I help with this? I mean, if you'll let me." Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure what to say. But Malik nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, sure," he replied. "We could use more hands. Just don't mess it up." A faint smile crossed Brandon's face. "I won't. I promise." Seeing Brandon take responsibility for his past actions gave Malik hope, not just for him but for the possibility of redemption in general. People weren't born bullies. They became them through choices and circumstances. And if those choices could be unmade, then maybe anyone could change. The community fair turned out to be a massive success, held on the football field under clear blue skies. The event featured food stalls representing different cultures, performances showcasing music and dance from around the world, and booths offering resources for students dealing with various challenges. Parents, teachers, and students mingled freely, exchanging stories and laughter. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like a true community. During the closing ceremony, Principal Thompson took the stage to thank everyone involved. "This year has been transformative for our school," she announced, her voice filled with emotion. "Thanks to the courage and leadership of students like Malik Johnson, we've taken important steps toward creating a safer, kinder environment for everyone. Let's keep this momentum going into next year and beyond." When Malik's name was mentioned, the crowd erupted into applause. He stood up awkwardly, waving briefly before sitting back down. "Don't let it get to your head," Sarah joked, nudging him playfully. "It won't," Malik assured her, smiling. "Because none of this would have happened without people like you backing me up." By graduation season, Malik had become something of a legend at Willow Creek. Not because of his martial arts skills or his ability to stand up to bullies, but because of his unwavering commitment to making things better. Seniors voted him most likely to change the world in the yearbook, a title he accepted with humility. "If I've learned anything this year," he wrote in his senior quote, "it's that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." On graduation day, Malik stood alongside his classmates wearing his cap and gown with pride. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the audience erupted into cheers. Amina, sitting proudly in the front row with their parents, held up a handmade sign that read, "We love you, Malik." He couldn't help but grin as he waved at her. After the ceremony, Malik lingered near the entrance, chatting with friends and teachers who wanted to congratulate him one last time. When Brandon approached him, Malik was initially caught off guard. But instead of hostility, Brandon extended his hand. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said earnestly. "You didn't have to forgive me, but you did. And because of that, I actually feel like I can start over." Malik shook his hand firmly, nodding. "Good luck, man. You've got this." As the sun set over the horizon, casting golden light across the campus, Malik took a moment to soak it, all in. He thought about the struggles he'd faced when he first arrived. The loneliness, the fear, the anger, and how far he'd come since then. This place, which had once felt so alien, had become home. Not because it was perfect, but because he'd helped make it better. That night, as he packed up his room in preparation for college, Malik paused to look at the karate dojo emblem stitched onto his old hoodie. It reminded him of everything his sensei had taught him: discipline, patience, and the importance of using strength wisely. Those lessons had carried him through some of the toughest moments of his life, and they would continue to guide him wherever he went next. Before heading to bed, Malik jotted down a few thoughts in his journal. "Today marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another," he wrote. "I came here thinking I'd have to fight my way through everything. Instead, I learned that the greatest battles aren't fought with fists. They're fought with hearts and minds. Standing up for myself was just the first step. Standing up for others is where the real work begins." As he closed the notebook and turned off the light, Malik felt a deep sense of peace. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was ready. Ready to face new challenges, meet new people, and continue making a difference. Because Malik Johnson wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. And nothing could stop him now.